Today's lesson is on 3.2 bar graphs and line graphs. I want you to write down these 4 very important things that you need to know about bar graphs and line graphs. These are some important things that you want to know about bar graphs and line graphs. Number 1, what do you label across the bottom of every graph?
Object.
All of the objects, okay? What do you always label up the side of your graph? Anything that's number related, okay? Number 2, read it to me, guys.
Always start with 0.
Okay, you want to make sure you start your graph with the 0 on the left-hand side. Just the boys, read me number 3.
Count by the same increments all the way up.
You're going to count by the same increments all the way up. So if I start and I decide I'm going to count by 2s, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, you're not going to jump up and then say the next one is 15. Okay, you're going to count by the same increments. Or start with 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, okay, counting by 5s. But make sure each increment is the same exact number all the way up. Last one, number 4, read me what it says. Always number the bars and lines. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. The first one we're going to do is we are going to go ahead for number 1 and make a bar graph of the data below. One thing that's important that I put there in red is that the bars are never going to be touching whenever you have a bar graph. So basically what's happened here is I'm going to give you a little information about this table. Back in the 1990s, there were 4 space shuttles that were used for many different missions. The number of missions taken by each of the shuttles during this time are shown here in the table. Now we want to figure out how we can represent this data visually. And one way to represent that data visually is by a bar graph. So today we're going to talk about how to make a bar graph. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw a line going up and down and then another one going from left to right. Okay, so we write notes because it's going to help us to be able to do this. So let's look at number 1 in the notes that you guys just wrote from the last slide. What does number 1 say?
Label the objects across the Make a bar graph.
Label the objects across the bottom of the graph. What do you think the objects are? Do you think these right here are the objects, or do you think these numbers are the objects? The shuttles are the objects, okay? Obviously, these other ones right here are the numbers. So we are going to label our objects across the bottom. So the first one that you see there is Atlantis. So we're going to label it across the bottom. What's the next object in order that we should label across the bottom?
Columbia.
Columbia. What's the next one, Katie?
Discovery.
Discovery. And the last one, everyone, is the?
Endeavor.
It's the Endeavor. All right, guys, what were those 4 things called?
Shuttles.
Shuttles, okay? So you have to label that and then go ahead and draw a box around it. Those are my things that I've labeled across the bottom. They are the objects, and those are the shuttles. Going back to our notes that we took, the first thing tells me to label the object across the bottom. What do I label up the side?
Numbers.
The numbers, okay? So if I'm looking at the original data that was given to me here, these are obviously the numbers, okay? So we're going to label it up the side. Those are the missions. Now, whatever it is that was labeled up here, you want to use the same exact word. So because that says missions, that's why we are marking that over there to be the missions. Landon, looking at our notes, we've now completed number 1. What does number 2 tell us to do?
Always start with zeros.
Always start with a 0. So you can see right here, I'm going to start with a 0 on the bottom left of my graph. Now what I've got to do is kind of look at the range of my data that I've got here. I have, what's the smallest number of missions that went? 13. What's the biggest number?
18.
18, okay? So I know I need to go just a little bit above 18. What's an even number that's bigger than 18? 20, okay? So let's go ahead and just do the top up there, a 20. All right, so as we're looking at this, I've got to go from 0 to 20, and I've got to figure out what increment I want to go by, okay? Because number 3 says count by the same increments all the way up. To me, it seems like a pretty good idea to count by 4s, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and divide it up to count by 4s so that I've got nice, even increments there. And then I'm going to go ahead and put those numbers in. All right, typically I have found that the hardest part of doing this for people is to come up with what they want their increments to be. Now, you might have decided different on this right here. There's no right or wrong. You could have counted by fives. If I had counted by ones, my graph would have been huge, okay? So that's why I decided to go ahead and try to count by fours. So next up, number 4 is going to ask us to always number the bars and the lines. So I'm going to go ahead and look here at my information. The first shuttle it talks about is the Atlantis. How many missions did the Atlantis go on? 16. So I'm going to go ahead and find right there. I'm going to put a 16, and then I'm going to draw my bar going down. Now number 4 says to always number the bars and the lines. So up above it, I'm going to make sure nobody questions or wonders, but it went on 16 missions. Let's go on to the next one, the Columbia. How many missions did the Columbia go on? 18. Now, if you look over here, do I have an 18? No. So where's the 18 going to go? In the middle of 16 and 20. All right, so just do the very best you can. But the reason why I have you label above it is so that I can for sure tell that that was 18 missions. Looking at the next one, Asia, how many did the Discovery go on? 17. Okay, so once again, as you can see, I don't have a 17. You know it's going to be in between 16 and 20 and closer to which one of those numbers?
16.
Closer to the 16, okay? Once again, don't forget to label it so we know for sure how many it was that you should have. And the final one, Jakari, for the Endeavor, how many missions did the Endeavor go on?
13.
13 is correct. Okay, so just remember with this one, when making a regular bar graph, I wrote it up there in the red. The bars are not touching each other. Notice that there's space in between the different shuttles and the missions that they went on. All right, my instructions are very similar for number 2, but instead of making a bar graph, it's asked me to make a double bar graph. Now, the reason why is because I'm not just giving information for the boys and their sports, I'm also giving information for the girls and these different sports, okay? Couple things that I want you to remember. In red, we wrote down the bars above the same object will touch, and you have to have a key. I'll explain to you what that means here as we start our example. So the first thing you're going to do with a bar graph and a double bar graph starts off exactly the same, okay? You're going to have your numbers going up and down, and you'll have your objects going from left to right. So looking at my information there, do you think the sports are going to be my objects, or do you think the boys and the girls will be my objects? The sports, okay? Because you can tell underneath the boys and the girls right here, I've got a whole bunch of numbers. And we know numbers go up the side. So it cannot be boys and girls down at the bottom. Instead, it will be our sports that are there down at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and start writing it down. Soccer is the first one. Then we've got basketball, track, and volleyball. Now remember, you want to tell us and label down there that these are your sports. As I look back at my notes from the very first slide, I always label the objects across the bottom, and what do I label up the side? The numbers, okay? What do you think my heading for those numbers is going to be? What's it say in the original table? Boys and girls. So up the side, we are going to write that those are the boys and the girls. In my notes, number 2 told me always start with a 0. So I'm going to start with that 0 down there at the bottom left. As I look at the range of these numbers, how big do I go up to with the boys and the girls information here? 26 is as big as I go. Now, we don't ever want to stop at the 26. We want to go just a tiny bit beyond. So what's a rounded number that could go up to 20 or past 26? A 30 would be a good one, okay? So let's go ahead. We'll do 30 up at the top. Now I've got to come up with increments. Remember, the increments is the toughest part to come up with. If I am ranging from 0 to 30, what do you think is a good number to count by all the way up there?
5.
I think counting by 5s is the perfect idea. So if you notice up until this point, labeling a regular bar graph and labeling a double bar graph are actually very similar. This right now is where it's going to get just a little bit different, okay? Let's look at our first information we have here. What sport are we talking about first?
Soccer.
Okay, so it looks like 26 boys played soccer. Do I have a 26 on my left-hand side?
Yes. No.
I don't, so it's going to be very close to what number? 25. So just do it a tiny bit above that. And then you're going to go ahead. What do I have to put above that bar? Number it with a 26. That helps me know that you know how to label it. Here's where the difference comes in. I do not just have boys here. What else do I have in this table? Girls. How many of the girls played soccer? 20. Now, if you notice up there in the red, it says the bars above the same object, or in this case, the same sport, are going to touch. So look, I'm going to connect it right there and then put 20. Now, as I look at the boys and the girls bars there, they look very, very similar. So for me, I'm going to put in a little key here. For us today, what we're going to do for each time it's a boy, we're going to go ahead and put a little diagonal stripe in there. Now, normally you could do it however you want to differentiate between the two. You could shade in the entire thing. You could put tiny hearts inside of it. You could put little polka dots inside of one. It does not matter to me, but they have to show that they are different, okay? And then notice the girls is staying just plain and simple. Let's look at basketball. Landon, how many boys played basketball? 17 of them, okay? So we're going to go ahead and label that there, and then don't forget to put that 17 above the bar. Jakari, how many girls played basketball? 21. Okay, guys, do I connect the graphs or do I give them space?
Connect them.
You want to connect them because they're having to do it the same exact thing. And then, Jakari, what should I do to the top of that bar? Okay, we got to label it. Am I finished with the basketball set?
No.
What should I do?
Polka dots.
Don't forget to put those stripes in there that show me that's the boys and then the other one's the girls. Next up, Isabel. How many boys played track?
25.
And how many girls played track?
25.
All right, so once again, there's still going to be a bar for the boys, a bar for the girls, and then we are going to label the boys so it looks a little bit different than the girls. The last one we have is for volleyball. We know that the boys had 11 and the girls had 15, and just remember to differentiate between the two genders. All right, as I look up there in red, the final thing that I said to you is you must have a key. So the key is going to be written up here. And basically what this shows is this is going to be the boys and this is the girls. And then you'll notice here I've got stripes in my boys and then regular, just plain and simple for the girls. Once again, your key can look however you want it. Just make sure that you label it correctly. And that's part of what I'll be looking for each time that you do a double bar graph. Okay, so for our final example today, number 3, we are making a line graph. A line graph I'm teaching you today because it's actually very similar to a bar graph, all right? You're still going to label your graphs the same. You're going to put your information in the same exact way, but there's just going to be one difference, okay? One thing here that I want to tell you is you can make a break in your data, and I'll explain to you what that means here in just a bit, okay? In these different years, 1995 through 1999, there were many subscribers to a magazine. You can see here the subscribers come in millions, okay? So we're going to start off our data the same exact way we did before. We'll have one line going up and down and one line going left to right. If you remember from our notes at the very beginning, what do we always label across the bottom of our graph? The objects, okay? What do you think the objects are here? Do you think the objects are the years or do you think the objects are the subscribers?
Years.
They are the years. So I'm going to go ahead and label the years across the bottom of my graph. Sometimes you might draw a line a little too small, so then just kind of extend it and make it a little bit bigger. Try to do it as neat as you can. All right, and then once again, you've got to label that those are the what? Those are the years, okay? Every graph, I'll be looking for this for your test next week, quizzes, homeworks, all that kind of stuff. You've got to make sure you're labeling all this stuff, okay? Labeling is definitely the hardest part of doing graphs. Up the side, going up and down, what do you always label there? The numbers, okay? Remember, that was in your notes for number 1. What are those numbers going up and down? What is it titled on our table? The subscribers, okay? They are the subscribers. Those are people who are subscribing to the magazine. And because it said in millions in my original problem, you want to make sure that you also put it in millions right there. All right, going back to our original notes on the front side of this paper, what does number 2 tell you? What number do we always start with?
0.
You have to start with a 0 every single time, no matter what. Now, I told you one little part in red at the beginning of this slide. I said you can make a break in your data. That means as I'm looking here at my numbers and I'm thinking, okay, I've got my lowest is a 34, my highest is an 86, but I don't want to start right there at a 0. I actually wanted to start at the number 34. If you want to do that, you can make a break in your data. So you're going to kind of cross out that little part that you see right there on the bottom left, and you're going to put a little tiny arrow to show you that right there, I am going to start at a different number than the number 0. So once again, when you're doing this, your increments could look different than mine. Today, I want you to just kind of stay with me as I'm teaching you the concept. So I want to start with the number 34, all right? And I have decided I'd like to go up with my increments. Last time we went up by 4s, but I feel like if I went up by 4s this time, since I have to get all the way to an 86, my graph would be huge. So I've decided instead I'm going to count by 10s. So I'm going to go up 44, 54, 64, 74, 84, and 94, okay? Once again, you notice my goal, I've got to get bigger than an 86, so I did. Now, I might think, hey, I don't have to get all the way up to an 86. Would I have been allowed to change this instead of a 94 to an 86?
Yes.
No. Here's why. Your increments have to be the same going up on the left side. So if I increased by 10 each time, I could not at the last minute just decided to increase by 2. Okay, so once again at this point, I have labeled everything exactly like I would a bar graph or a double bar graph. Now here's where it's going to be just a teeny bit different. Instead of labeling and drawing bars, I'm going to just label them with a little tiny dot. Okay, so let's look at the first one, 1995. Katie, how many subscribers were there in the year 1995?
34.
34 million, okay, because remember our answer is in million. Exactly like we did before, number 4 on my original note said I have to number the bars and the lines. So I'm going to put my 34 million right there. Now, once again, you don't have to say the word million because it's already over here in my graph, okay? Next up, Kyla. How many in 1996?
44.
All right, there were 44 million. All right, once again, what do I need to do to that dot, Kyla?
Label it with 44 million, but you don't have to write the million.
You are correct. Alex, in 1997, how many subscribers were there? 55 million. Put your dot and then label the dot, label that it's 55 million on top. All right, 1998, how many, guys? 69 million, label that dot above. And the final one, 1999, how many?
86.
86 million. Now, did I ask you to make me a bar graph?
No.
What did I ask you to do? A line graph. So guess what you're going to do with the line graph? You connect the dots, okay? This is a 34, it goes up there. You are just connecting the dots, and now I have a line graph. All right, so the main difference between a line graph and a bar graph is that one has bars and one has lines, okay? Today I want to talk to you about your homework. Tonight we're doing a flipped classroom. So instead of you coming to class tomorrow and hearing me teach, you get to go home tonight and hear me teach, and then tomorrow in class we're going to do an activity. So right now I'm going to go ahead and give you your notes for tonight's homework, okay? This is going to be the notes for 3.3. It's on a section called Stem and Leaf Plots.